Good morning. It is Sunday, the 3rd of December 2023, and I'm going to continue my broadcast. Sorry about the dingle dangle in the background. As Merry Christmas, pretend it's got some sparkly lights wrapped around it. I'm going to continue a series of broadcasts. I've just finished watching, as I try to do, and many other people in Australia try to do on Sunday mornings, watch or catch up with later on ABC iView, the Insiders program. And I find it absolutely fascinating that this morning they had on Sarah Hanson-Young, and apart from the fact that it was the first time apparently that the Greens had been photographed with the Environment Minister from Labor since for 11 years, I think it was, and so therefore since 2011, I think they said, under when Gillard was in. I reiterate to the Greens and Labor, if only you would stop fighting with each other. And I know that you have very, very different positions for very valid reasons on things. That is crystal clear. However, your primary vote is so extensive now with the Greens, and Labor, even when it bottoms out, is no less than 30%. So you would never, ever be out of power again if you would simply do what the National Party and the Liberal Party did and join in a coalition. And they're the LNP, the Liberal National Party coalition in Australia. The National Party are mainly farmers and in the regions, and the so-called Liberal Party in Australia are not liberal at all. They are conservative, often Christian voters who have a massive deficit in their, a massive underrepresentation of women in their leading positions and in the cabinet when they formed one. And in fact, we comically had a man called Tony Abbott as the Minister for Women not very long ago in first world democracy called Australia. So, and then of course the Liberal National Party rolled the best man that they had, Julie Bishop. And, she left, and they got rid of her. And, of course, we had Scott Morrison not only causing suicides, literally, and deaths by allowing his ministers to enact robo-debt. We also had him secretly appoint himself to 5 portfolios at the same time that believing that a little man called God lives in the sky with a willy dangling between his legs. And, you would have to call that hallucinating in most modern people's eyes. But nonetheless, this was the Prime Minister of Australia not very long ago, who got rid of Malcolm Turnbull as well, who is an actual Liberal, somebody who believes in terms of, if you were describing this to a United States audience, someone who believes in, freedom. Small government and freedom of the individual, and they honestly believe that the market is going to have a trickle-down effect, when of course we know that they're pissing on down our legs to insinuate that, because the market only fixes up the rich, basically fixes things for the rich. As anyone with half a brain cell and any real economic data would be well aware. So, moving along, again, to finalise that, if Labor and the Greens would stop fighting, they would be the LGP against the LNP, and we could get rid of the LNP and put them to bed, the no-elition to bed, as someone else coined it, for quite a long while. But what I found fascinating, other than that, was the discussion that they finally were. Sarah Hanson-Young was asked, and she's one of the leaders in the Greens party in Australia, in case this is going overseas, and she was asked, because 4 women were killed in her state of South Australia alone last week by men. It's very rarely the other way around. Very, 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 very rarely, despite the manifold reasons that women would have in terms of their so-called motivation to knock a few men off. And that is a broad global statement, because of course we look and we find no religions where women are overwhelmingly in power telling men that they can't leave the house without a woman beside them, or they have to put a bag over their heads in 45-degree heat, or that they can't go to school at all because they have a dick. For example, that is just preposterous to most men, but that is exactly what the globe is doing globally to women, including the Catholic Church, still advocating no birth control for women, no abortion and no condoms in massive swathes of third world countries where women have no access to free contraception. And of course, again, to cover off things I've said before in previous broadcasts, if you'd like, as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation so eloquently put it, if you would like to actually bring down climate change, immediately the first thing you would do is roll out global contraception for free to all women, not dependent on any male regime allowing it or not. That means no religion, no government gets to say so. You just give it to women on discretion of roll it out through national NGO agencies, and you would halve the population within a couple of generations, which would radically bring down climate change. But of course, where is that conversation on the global map in the mouths of male controlling leaders? Nowhere. Where is it? And if you look at APEC, only like last month in 2023 in San Francisco, 24 leaders there, 1 female. You got a problem. That's your problem. Problem is men, not all men, the leadership of men and the squandering of women through that leadership in religious and governmental regimes around the world. Okay, so to cover that off, let's just get that straight. But fascinatingly about this morning, Sunday, the 3rd of December 2023's in ABC TV program, which a lot of the political class watch and a lot of their, policy advisors watch, it was the comment when David Spears put it to Sarah Hanson-Young and said, what can we do about this murdering of women that is still going on? 4 women murdered in South Australia, which is Hanson-Young, to repeat myself, home state last week alone, and she was like, well, women are sick of this. I was like, well, great, and women and we are sick of it. It's this. If this was any other, as David Spears and many other female commentators have said for years and years, if this was any other national problem, you'd be doing something about it. Fascinatingly enough, they had just had a conversation about the High Court of Australia's recent ruling, and they'd only just published the findings and their rulings this week, but they brought down the ruling a couple of weeks ago, saying that indefinite detention, detention without any limit, is illegal in Australia. That is actually brilliant news, of course, for refugees and asylum seekers who should not be locked up for 9 and 10 and 11 years on privatised jails that Australian idiot governments allowed taxpayers to pay $2 and $3 and $4 billion to jail some of the most vulnerable people on earth, and then put them in detention indefinitely to the point where they killed themselves in droves and then were so mentally distraught and ruined permanently when they came out that they literally were killed on the inside and became, of course, yet another burden to the taxpayer, as if their humanity wasn't a good enough reason in the first place. And yet, so they talked about ankle bracelets, and they laughed at the fact that the Department for Home Affairs in Australia had not even owned an ankle bracelet until the High Court ruling a couple of weeks ago. Unbelievably, this isn't being discussed straight. So they have a conversation about, on the Insiders program on ABC TV today, they have a conversation about about high-risk offenders who have raped and murdered people and pedophiles who've literally assaulted and raped little children, being released into the community on order of the High Court, not of Labor, and how they're going to use the final week in Parliament in Canberra this week to scramble across making new legislation to make sure that ankle bracelets can be put on these high-risk offenders, one of who's already disappeared. Well, in 2017, I said to the very great Australian documentary filmmaker Kay Harrison, who happened to be my neighbour in Fegans Bay at the time, 1 year after my godfather at 68 years of age murdered his wife Anne, I said, I don't understand. If this was any other national crisis, what they would be doing is putting ankle bracelets and GPS monitoring on high-risk AVO men who are risking to kill their ex-partners or current partners and children. Why not? And by the way, why wouldn't you roll out a rural fire service style national emergency plan, given that fires on average, not in clusters, kill only 1 Australian a year on average over the last 3 decades, whereas men are murdering at least 2 women a week in Australia on average usually. And unbelievably and quite disingenuously, Suzanne Ley, one of the so-called Liberal National Party coalition, I say so-called because they're not Liberal at all, they're Conservative, the LNP minister, so it's the alternative government to Australia, she's an elected member of Parliament, and she comes out this week and makes what I would call a faux stand, an FAUX stand, on reading the names of the 60 women who've been murdered this year to date in Australia. 66, I think it was. I'm sorry, I don't have that fact straight. I'll go check that. Point of it being, she reads out their names. And This is the same party that cut funding to so-called domestic violence shelters. It's always a cute, quaint little euphemism because it's male violence against women and children. And their party cut funding across the board to organisations who rolled out provision of services and shelter to those women. And to get back to my point, as I said to Kay Harrison, the documentary filmmaker, in 2017, why aren't we rolling out ankle bracelets on high-risk male offenders who literally, when women have gone to court and said, look, here's a voicemail, here's a text, here's any evidence and proof, he's threatened to kill me, or here's a recording that I made secretly of him, which in this case needs to be legislated. We need legislation to ensure that secret voice recordings made by women who are in danger of their lives are admissible in a court of law, because in Australia at the moment, you do not have, unless you're the Australian Federal Police, you do not have permission to make evidence admissible to a court of law unless the person who's being recorded knows they're being recorded. And of course, women who are so radically compromised by male violence and threats to them are not in any position to go, I'm recording you right now, because if men are violating them or threatening to, that is a surefire way to make sure that those recording devices are taken by those very dangerous men. And this needs to change, of course, as just one of the many practical things you could do to bring down these problems straight away, and then fit these men with ankle bracelets and GPS tracking, and then have an entire section of the police who are called the domestic violence police, literally, who are devoted in the same way we have highway patrol cars to revenue raise for New South Wales, because they just sit there and fire a radar gun down the road at you, don't they? And then you get your fine for speeding sent to you in the post. They don't give chase up the road to pull you over and stop you so you don't hurt yourself or anyone else like they used to. They just sit there with a fixed camera or a radar camera and ping you and generate revenue. They don't give a shit whether you die or not. Let's face it, they don't. Otherwise, they would chase you up the road and stop you, right? So this is a cynical revenue-raising exercise. It is not bringing down the road toll. The road toll is still going up, and that's how you know that what I just said is true. So we call it evidence and facts. So the fact and evidence is that nothing is bringing down murdering of women, and of course they're going, oh, well, we've got to roll out these ankle bracelets for these high-risk offenders that the High Court has just allowed out into the community because we cannot have indefinite detention of people. And yet they're not talking about it when the very next conversation they had on the Insiders program this morning was about murdering of women by men every week in Australia, and how those statistics are not going down either. And so, in 2017, I said to Kay Harrison, why wouldn't you have a rural fire brigade style situation where you have volunteers in the community who are rigorously trained? You cannot just... You cannot do what Scott Morrison did not do and hold a hose in the rural fire service unless you are trained up to know what size hoses get rolled out on what tanks for what situation and what you can carry given your capacity physically. And otherwise, and then you get put through a rigorous training program of protocol and how to do it. And this is an entire class of volunteers around Australia. Well, if men in power gave a shit about women being murdered, they would roll something very similarly modelled on the rural fire service out, because around Australia, like now. Like, let's go. It's 2023 and you're going, oh, what can we do? Oh, but we can put ankle bracelets on these high-risk offenders from the High Court. No worries, yeah, that's fine. Oh, we just don't know what to do about men murdering women. How about you put GPS tracking ankle bracelets on high-risk offending AV? I mean, anyone who's substantially making what we know to be threats against women and their children and to murder them, partners current and past. Order the men out of the house. Why have we got women's shelters? Why are women being asked to leave men who are threatening them? Why? The men should be, on order of the court, immediately removed by a police force fitted with ankle bracelets, GPS tracked immediately, and then an entire squadron of dedicated police force, if you can do it for the thieving of a mobile phone or road patrol, where you're not actually chasing anyone up the road to stop them from speeding anyway, but you'll find them, and then you'll have your nice little, oh, it's so fun for the men and the girls to get out in their cars and woo, 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 bzzz, race up the road and, pull someone over and, oh, we're the cops. It's keystone cops is what the Australian police are, because they are not tackling the very basic things that they're meant to be tackling, called murder of women, right? So you are keystone cops all across Australia because there is no dedicated domestic violence police force. And in fact, the Queensland Police Force had the temerity to argue that they had, their actual leader recently, a couple of years ago, argued that when a report was brought out to say that, with a finding that they had a cultural problem with accepting women's statements that they were at risk of being assaulted and violated and or murdered by men, the overwhelmingly male-dominated Queensland Police Force leadership came out and made a statement, we've got no problem with the culture in the Queensland Police Force. Like, they are so narcissistic as a class of people. For starters, bullies, and because bullies are often attracted to the police. There you go. Excuse me, it wasn't a wardrobe malfunction. It was an actual camera malfunction. As a class, I really do despise the New South Wales Police Force for various reasons, which I've covered off before and I'm happy to cover off again. They're thieves in my local area. They are literally thieves, and they're bully boy thugs. And they're often misogynist bully boy thugs as well. And anyway, getting back to the story, Queensland local police literally said, we don't have a problem here, eat a dick. That was their paraphrase. That was their response to an official inquiry that found that they have a culture of denial about women coming to them, saying, look, I'm in serious trouble here because a man is risking my life and threatening me and my children. And so, again, we could roll out a rural fire service if Hanson Young and anyone else listening to this on TV, literally going, oh, we're sick of it, and then absolutely no pragmatic solutions are being spoken about in response. Well, here's a few. Admissible, as I said, covering off this subject before I move on to some readings from the Family Law Court and from DCJ New South Wales. After yesterday's once in the entire year visit that I was allowed with my own child, professional childcare working government regulated 4 years, 50-hour-a-week childcare provider here, professional nanny to barristers and lawyers. So these people are human rights violating, but I'm tripping off on that before I finish, and forget to finish my point. You could roll out the rural fire service style model tomorrow for women and children who are at risk of domestic violence, or, as I said, quaint euphemism for male violence and murder of them. You could have these centres. If you look at, I invite you to Google the New South Wales Fire Headquarters, and just have a look at the hundreds of millions of dollars of high-resolution screens and cameras positioned all over Australia with GPS monitoring of the fire movements across various fire fronts, of where individual fire trucks are with their GPS satellite monitoring. They're volunteer-trained organisation who are going to go out at the drop of a hat, literally the call to response, and they go out and they literally fight these fires that kill one person on average in Australia a year, when we've got 60 women murdered by men this year, and you're saying that you can't do anything about it. It's bullshit. What it is that you have no value for women's lives enough that you will do something about it. And it's exactly congruent. You've got to give the Australian governments overall, to this point in time, 23, both Labor and LNP, you've got to give them 10 points for consistency, because none of them have any commitment to universal childcare either. And of course, that's what women who leave men need, because if they're going to pay for their children's food and a roof over their head and not descend into homelessness, as Dr. Anne Summers has so thoroughly, perfectly pointed out in her interrogation last year in 2022 of the ABS data, the Australian Bureau of Statistics data, women who leave violent men, usually who have children as well as dependents, usually descend into complete poverty, and this is statistically proven. So if you did give a shit, Australian members of Parliament, really, let's call it what it is. I'm allowed to say the S word. If you gave a damn about women's lives in this country, you would immediately provide universal childcare on the basis of their humanity and equality alone, let alone on the basis of the fact that economically, even Bronwyn Bishop managed to make sure that we knew on the Jenny Brocky Insight SBS program years ago that the best available evidence we have is that $1.87 is returned to the Australian tax base for every dollar spent on childcare. So what's your argument for not doing it? You could even argue it on economic grounds, and you can find your $600 billion for your already redundant nuclear submarines because the Chinese have already manufactured underwater drones that detect submarines. So they are redundant, as well as the nuclear waste being highly poisonous, as well as them not going to be delivered for another 10 years until China's done whatever it wants in the South China Sea and turned up for a cup of tea, as I've said before, in the port of Darwin, which the Liberal National Party coalition under Malcolm Turnbull as the leader and the Country Party leading Northern Territory at the time allowed them to lease for 99 years, the port of Darwin, right next to United States, America and allies' strategic military bases in the north of Australia. So these men can't run the country properly, okay? So the LNP are not an option for Australia because they're top-heavy with men. They rolled their best man, Julie Bishop. They've rolled series of women out for things that men get away with all the time. So back on to other points now. We've covered off that if you actually wanted to tackle violence against women, you would evict men from the home, why women should be seeking shelter and being asked to leave a home when they are the ones victimised by male violence in the first place, why they are being asked to run and the man stays in the palace risking everyone. It just makes it look like purdah. It's not purdah, sorry. Purdah is literally what happens around so many other places in the world. Women are literally kept indoors, not allowed to leave. That's purdah. You had it in COVID lockdown. Did you like it, boys? Did you like your purdah? Did you like purdah? You had an international taste of purdah. You were locked in. You were not allowed out of the house. Oh, hang on, you were allowed out of the house within a 5-kilometre range to get groceries and food, right? You weren't allowed out of the house for the rest of the time. And that is what lockdown was, and that's called purdah, P-U-R-D-A-H, and that's what men do to women globally. Purdah in many, many places on earth. They're just not even allowed to leave the house, and in Saudi Arabia, it's only accompanied by a man, a male relative, etc., etc. And can you imagine if women did that to men anywhere? It just doesn't happen. It's sci-fi, isn't it? But that's what women are doing to men. So you got a problem here, right here. If you want to stop the murdering of women around Australia and the world, but we're talking about what we can do in our first world democracy that we think is advanced, okay? Rural fire service right now, rural fire service style rollout of volunteers trained nationally to respond to domestic violence, ankle bracelets that they can immediately procure ankle bracelets for these high-risk offenders who were released into the community by the High Court a couple of weeks ago, who've raped and murdered and pedophiled and committed atrocities. But they're scrambling to make sure that these alien offenders can all have ankle bracelets, GPS tracked with the cops monitoring them, attached immediately. But we can't do this for men who are threatening to murder women. 1, ankle bracelets for risk offenders, okay, on men. Ankle bracelets for people who threaten to kill other people and threaten to harm other people, okay? Ankle bracelets. 2, admissible legislation changed immediately such that women who go to any court anywhere in Australia, be it local, state or federal, but it's usually local court because that's your first port of call, and say my ex or my partner is threatening to kill me, that legislation immediately needs to be enacted such that if they make secret recordings of a man threatening to kill them, as I did in my relationship with the father of my youngest child when he visited my house to drop in to visit our little baby when I was running a federal government regulated daycare service to get away from him in the first place, but was forced to stay near him by John Howard and Pauline Hanson's presumption of shared care laws, which Labor just overturned last week, but they didn't do, as I've said before in previous broadcasts. Again, I may be repeating myself, but I don't know who's watching all of them and who's just watching one of them. So I try to cover off all of the issues, touch on a lot of issues in all of these, just in case you only watch one. that presumption of shared care that Pauline Hanson campaigned when she had the balance of power for John Howard to bring in, which he did, obliged women to share their children with men who had literally assaulted them and violated them. And I had to peddle an 820, which went to $900 a week rent in Sydney before I'd eaten or fed my children food or paid a phone bill or an electricity or a gas bill or a car bill or anything. $900 a week. Again, turning back to Dr. Anne Summers, one of the world's most famous feminists, Australian woman, Damned Whores and God's Police. She wrote for a thesis in the 70s, which she turned into a book very cleverly, so people actually read it and it didn't get dust on a shelf. And she was Paul Keating's first Minister for Women. Not minister, but advisor for, I think she was, sorry, not minister, advisor for policy on women, excuse me, correction. And interrogated, as I said, again, the 2022, she interrogated the Australian Bureau of Statistics data to see what happens to women financially and otherwise when they leave violent men, and of course they fare appallingly financially, as I now am. And so, in this case, again, just to finish that previous story off, he would come by at night to visit my daughter, and even though I was working from the time she was 2 weeks old, 50 hours a week myself whilst breastfeeding at night, because childcare in Australia was so unaffordable, that I had to open a childcare service to be able to afford to pay to stay near the fathers of my child. These are called intersectional issues. That's what academics call them, not just feminist academics. The intersection of housing unaffordability, violence against women, laws that previously, until Labor changed them a couple of weeks ago, obliged women to share children with men who had assaulted or violated them in any way. Housing unaffordability, and of course, you know, they're blamed for their poverty. To get back to points I've made in previous broadcasts, and I'm going to read some scripts out today from the DCJ New South Wales records and from the Family Law Court of Australia records that happened in my case to illustrate exactly what I'm saying. Because this is an absolute human rights violation of women, particularly Aboriginal women, because these women are literally being told, oh, well, you can't afford a house, you've been couch surfing for 2 years, as one woman on SBS was told recent. You know, they backlit her so she couldn't be identified, so the children weren't identified, you know, in the violation of their privacy. And then they changed her voice and she told her truth. And her truth was that welfare authorities had literally taken her children off her because even though she had done no harm to them and they were perfectly happy with their mother, they had been couch surfing with friends for 2 years because she could not afford to feed them on a single parent's pension, could not afford childcare, obviously wasn't able to attain full-time work and have her children looked after. And so they took her children. That is in Australian law, there is a term called moral hazard. And a moral hazard is when you reward a perpetrator. So let's be very, very clear. Welfare agencies, Northern Territory number 1, New South Wales number 2, on earth per capita are the biggest removers of children from their mothers on earth. And that is usually women who've been assaulted by men and cannot afford childcare and housing. So the genius solutions in Australia by Australian governments across the board on state levels is to remove children from women who have no housing affordability and who have been assaulted by men. Genius. That's called a moral hazard argument in any normal court of law. It's when you reward a perpetrator for their crime by letting them get away with it and then giving them the very thing they want. In my case, my children. Okay? And lest we forget, the person I'm talking about who's got my youngest child and kept her since Christmas Day 2022 has done this in order to avoid childcare payments because they're generated based on how many nights per week a child stays with each parent. So a parent can have a child all day from 8 in the morning till 8 at night, but if that child goes home and stays with the other parent, child support agency payments are generated based on where they sleep. Get it? So that, again, to cover off other issues I've made before, there is a major, major disincentive. So the carrot for people to not share their child with their ex-partner is the generation of child support payments. The stick doesn't exist because there's no criminalisation of what happens when a parent keeps their child from the other parent. That's called parental alienation, otherwise known as profound estrangement, otherwise known as toxic parent syndrome. And they turn the child's mind into thinking that that's what the child wants. They get the child so used to living as if the other parent doesn't exist or matter, usually deriding that parent as well, running that parent down in the child's mind, that they just get used to it. And then by the time a law court, in this case an Australian family law court, will honestly average 2 years from the initiation of an application until the actual hearing or trial date. 2 years, because you're forced through mediation, unless there's been family violence and you can get a little bit happening a bit quicker. I alleged family violence. We took 2 years to get to court, and then unbeknownst to me, as I've said before, because I'm not a lawyer, my affidavit from his ex-wife saying that she was constantly abused by him, verbally, emotionally and mentally, and then he kicked her up the arse and chipped her coccyx bone on Christmas Day in front of her children in the year 2000. Merry Christmas. Right? That affidavit was out of date because it was older than 1 year by the time we got to a trial. So you need to do many things, Mark Dreyfus and Labor. Since you're in government, let's start actually kicking some goals about violence against women and murder of women, okay? 1, legislative reform that evidence is admissible in the case of violence against women, that they are recording any threats to them, where it is being recorded and the person speaking, making the threat, doesn't know that they're being recorded, because at the moment that's inadmissible evidence in courts of law. Whereas in violence cases, a woman needs to be able to prove this, and it usually goes on behind closed doors because men who assault and violate women are usually such miserable cowards that they don't have the guts to do it out in front of other people where they might actually be seen. In fact, one of their tactics is to isolate their victims first so that they don't have any contact. But that didn't happen to me. It would never happen to me and many other women. So they maintain their friendships, tell other people, but that's not proof. So they need to be able to give evidence to a court to demonstrate it. And if they make a secret recording, that legislation needs to change right now, so that evidence is admissible, number 1. Number 2, ankle bracelets on men who are offenders and found to be, through processes like where women record what men are saying to them or show text screenshots. Ankle bracelets go immediately on those men with GPS tracking, number 2. Number 3, you have a dedicated wing of every state police force. Every state police force is trained immediately, a dedicated wing, because if you've got dedicated highway patrol revenue-raising exercises where you don't chase the person up the road and stop them from speeding, but you fine them for doing it, and then you have a little bit of fun with your boys' toys out there chasing people like, Starsky and Hutch or the Keystone Cops. If you can Keystone Cops it up the road and have fun with your little toys, you can have fun, right? Irony. Just for those who are as bone stupid as the Wollongong Police Force, who, when they came to arrest me, which has been overturned, not before they stole my grandparents' antique heirloom 9-carat gold ruby encrusted earrings and my christening jewellery, 9-carat gold as well with my name on it, two badges, gone. They were so sexist and such revolting, bully boys, that's literally what they were, that they managed to even insult me as they were waiting to put me in a shit-smeared paddy wagon for trying to give my daughter food that I'd cooked her and clothes, when they were falsely arresting me under a completely incorrect charge. Managed to insult me because this was the day after the Spain had won against England in the women's final of the soccer, and one of the filth down at Wollongong literally managed to tell me, and I quote, "Oh, I don't watch pussy games like that. I watch real games of sport." And I just looked at him, and I swung around to the other member of the constabulary standing beside me, and I said, Could you tell me what you actually have to do to gain entry into the police force? Like, what HSC level do you have to have, or what IQ test do you have to have? And he said, "Oh, it's not much, but it pays my living." And I thought, yeah, well, there's your problem right there. You've got an entire police force who resent the fact that men are being told that they are largely 97% the perpetrators of rape, murder, and war on the planet. Oh, we resent that, so we're going to start putting AVOs on women for trying to feed their own children who whose family law courts and human rights are not being enforced in any meaningful way. And so covering off that, that's there you go for Paul Scully, and who's the Minister for Kira and Wollongong down here in the Illawarra, okay? You have a very serious problem down at the Wollongong police station, but that's another matter. So getting back on that, legislation that makes sure that women can be have admissible evidence when they secretly record men threatening them, or give any form of evidence that they're being threatened, they or their children's lives. 2, ankle bracelets that are GPS tracked. 3, a dedicated wing of every state police force, in fact create a whole new one, that are well versed in the training of domestic violence and a whole bunch of things that go around that. 4, roll out, so that was 3, a whole dedicated wing of police forces in every state and territory immediately. And 4, roll out a rural fire, based on a model similar to the Rural Fire Service, roll out a national, volunteered, massive investment in all the TV screens with the cameras that show you where the fire front's moving, so that we can watch where these men are in their cars, in other people's houses, hiding, going back to their families and hiding, going in a hotel and motel around the corner from the woman and her children, so that they can sneak out and murder them. And who can forget Tara Brown? Again, this is what makes part of the culture of the Australian police forces in various states, male-dominated. And I say filth, and I mean it, for the reason that the Queensland Minister of Police came out against an independent inquiry that found out that state's police force had a serious problem with believing women about AVOs. And Tara Brown, who can forget? Tara Brown went to them multiple times in the weeks before her murder, when she dropped her child, I believe the child was 2 or 3, doesn't matter, very young child, to daycare, and he was stalking her, and she drove off, and then her husband, I believe it was, I'm not sure if they were married, but her partner, the father of the child, and a New Zealand Maori man, ran fully tattooed, and I'm going to call up his name in a moment because I wrote to him, ran her off the road. Her car rolled onto its roof, and as she screamed, "Help, help, help," he pulled up beside her. He's a big man, muscly, tattooed, lifted a metal grate up off a pathway, and then bashed her to death over the head to finish her off. Think about that for a moment. She'd been to the Queensland Police multiple times. Now stop saying Albo, Peter Dutton, Kate Washington, Minister for DCJ, Yasmin Catley, Minister for Police in New South Wales, Natasha Fyfe in the Northern Territory, where you've got Aboriginal women being murdered and violated at the highest rates on earth, virtually, literally, in democracies, and you're privatising your police force so that these women who are sleeping homeless in parks, hopefully under light and CCTV monitoring so that they can have some safety, are being moved off and out of the way by privatised police force. And ABC investigates it a couple of weeks ago on Four Corners, and not only does she not answer any response to requests for interview, she actually goes on commercial radio and shit cans the ABC for daring to question why she's privatising her police force. I mean, all of these issues are called intersectional. They intersect each other because they're about violence against women, housing unaffordability, childcare unaffordability, and the fact that there's not legislation that's competent and a regime that's competent enough, federally or at state level, to enforce laws that protect women. And the ones that I have just suggested would be a great start, okay? So let's just start there. And meanwhile, I'm going to read you what, as I've told you before, I'm sorry I'm having trouble with this camera angle here. It just fell off. I've got a very unprofessional, precarious rig going on. Anyone who wants to donate to my GoFundMe or any other, seriously, I'm needing a professional rig. I've got the goddamn university qualification from it. This is a letter from my local federal minister, Labor rep in the area that I am in, the seat member for Cunningham. Alison Burns is her name. And I literally spent 3 months went 4 times in person over 3 months. So that's only once a month roughly, just over once a month, and wrote to her several times and finally got a response on the 23rd of October, insinuating, as she did on the phone when I then called her, because I ended up calling Tanya Plibersek's office and who've been extremely helpful and supportive about this, because I used to be a constituent of Tanya Plibersek's up in Darlinghurst in Sydney. And her office and all of her policy advisors and 2 ICs were brilliant, and they're all women, extremely competent women. Shout out to Kerry and Tony and the several others there who have been extremely supportive. And I just actually phoned them and said, what's going on? Like, I've voted Labor and Greens and of course that's changed to Voluntary Euthanasia Party number 1 now in 2016 after I watched my mother die. But what's going on down here in the electoral office? I've actually been in person several times, and I have written to them several times, and the answer was, dear Ms. Farrow-Pryke, over the last month, no, wrong, it was over the last 3 months. So she writes, over the last month, you can see it on the first page there, you have been in contact with me in my electoral office on multiple occasions, as if I'm harassing them, in which you have expressed dissatisfaction. No, I've suggested legislative reform with the workings of the Family Law Act and the failure of the courts to enforce orders granting you contact with your children. Now that is, let's just stop right there. That's a failure to enforce, she said it, a failure to enforce family law court orders that are extant. They are already in existence. But if I go down the road and steal a packet of chips, particularly if I'm a 10-year-old child in the Northern Territory on their 3rd offence, I'll be in jail. Or if I don't pay my parking fine and after 4 months they cancel my licence and I drive my own car despite my skill set not changing one iota, I will go to the local court, which is a criminal court, which is the same one that a murderer and a rapist goes to. And then I will get a police record and or a serious fine and or a jail time and or a community detention or community service order, Not usually detention for driving unlicensed. But yet, no enforcement of family law court parenting orders at all. And then people literally suicidal. We've just had Movember, suicidal awareness. 7 men I know and 3 women haven't seen their children for 4 and 5 years, and they describe being literally living suicidally, as I had been when they did this to me, when they, being the 2 fathers of my 2 daughters, did this to me. And bear in mind again, one of them is a sperm donor who has 4 children to 3 separate women, 2 of them with Lauren Jackson, Order of Australia basketball player, and one with a woman, and she's in Albury-Wodonga, I believe, and then we've got one down in Melbourne, a lawyer, Louise Braithwaite. And these and yet he did this to me without any penalty. Just as soon as my mother died, just ceased contact with my child and ceased enforcing these family law court orders in any meaningful or proper way, disallowing her half-school holiday time with me, for example. Hiding her from me and then bragging about it to welfare authorities, saying, of course, we never tell the mother where her children are. Fact. So Alison Burns, the local MP for Cunningham, and no one wants to start a fight with their MP, right? These are people I vote for, but she falsely accuses me of coming in many times in 1 month. In fact, it was 4 times in 3 months. And then she says that I've expressed dissatisfaction. Well, no, I actually suggested policy reform, like criminalising parental alienation. That's what I suggested. Expressed dissatisfaction with the workings of the Family Law Act and the failure of the courts, no, it's a failure of police or other agencies, to enforce orders granting you contact with your children. Contact. Hello. Yeah, not even phone contact. Let's call it meaningful time, which is what the Family Law Court Act under Section 60cc defines it as, a meaningful relationships. Dinners, breakfast, lunch, time watching TV, time talking about what you did with your week, time doing homework, time cuddling, obviously, reading a book, meaningful time is what it's called under Section 60cc and Article 9 of the United Nations Rights of the Child, UNESCO. Read it. Expressed dissatisfaction with the workings of the Family Law Act and the failure of the courts to enforce orders granting you contact with your children. It is my understanding that you have raised these same concerns with the relevant Commonwealth ministers. Yes, I have. Mark Dreyfus, Federal Attorney General, is ultimately responsible for the Family Law Court Act, so he was port of call number one, obviously. And I wrote a submission that closed in their round that closed a couple of weeks ago to them, which said, yes, you've done one thing, but you've failed to do the most basic and obvious thing, and you've caused a moral hazard in the process. You've failed to criminalise parental alienation, which is why I'm going to Canberra this week. And so this is a quick shout out right now to anyone watching who ends up watching this, or pass it around to any friends you know who live there. I have no funds whatsoever, so I cannot afford a hotel. When I put this call out last time, people said, oh, there's a cheap hostel for $100. I don't have $500. To go down to Canberra, I need someone's spare couch or a spare room. So if you know anyone in Canberra, I'm coming down this week to literally door knock. And on that note, just a quick aside again, I lowered myself for the first time in my history, to contact an LNP member other than Rob Stokes at the state level 23 years ago to tell him you need to ban commercial in confidence clauses on all government procurement contracts immediately, because if private, I've told this covered this off before, just shooting off on a few tangents and threading them all together at the end, because right now what's happening is the entire Australian government on all levels, all three tiers, local, state and federal, are when they procure are practicing this. When they procure anything, any goods or service, like a piece of paper or a piece of machinery or a road contract or anything that they need at all, the companies who provide those services to them are writing contracts where they include commercial in confidence clauses saying, well, this is commercial, we're making money out of it, and so in confidence, we're not going to tell anybody how much money that is. And don't let us not forget, as I've said in previous pieces here, again, I don't know who's seeing all of them or who's seeing one, so I'm covering as many of them as I can off in each one. So forgive me for repeating myself. But this means that the very thing that caused democracy, where the poor people in France went, Jesus, we're working 15 hours a day, we're breaking our backs, we're dying young, where are our taxes going? Oh my God, it's going over there to the rich people who are building that palace. Off with their heads! We can see where our taxes are going. Off with our heads, off with their heads, off with their heads. It's not a good enough spend to be just lining your pockets. But yet in Australia, it's perfectly legal right now for local, state and federal governments to procure goods and services, any goods or services, and the company writes a contract that suits themselves, particularly big companies like Transfield, who have rebranded. I believe they're Broad Spectrum or Serco. I really should know that right now. And these massive companies who do things like building $2 billion worth of offshore refugee detention centres on Manus Island and Nauru and Christmas Island have the hide and then the legal ability to inbuild into their contracts that you can't, you and me can't see what our money, our tax money, is paying to them for the performance, or often the non-performance, of these contracts. And so you've got no transparency in democracy whatsoever. So the very fundament of democracy, the thing that caused it, tax, unless we forget, the Americans are very suspicious of tax because they don't like the English about it. You know, hence their entire insane schizophrenic relationship to, oh, well, why should we pay tax? You know, this is the entire problem. It's right at the seat of it. I'm calling on Zali Steggall. I'm calling on the Teals, you know, on Allegra Spender, and all ministers immediately on all levels to outlaw this. And so to get back to lowering myself, to contact Michaelia Cash's office this week, because the ex-Chief Justice of the Family Law Court, John Pascoe, Order of Australia, who's calling for a royal commission into the Family Law Court, by the way, and suggesting the obvious thing that welfare agencies and state government police and agencies and welfare agencies need to have real-time data directly available to the Family Law Court so that they can see what's going on particularly for women who are being threatened by men, when the most vulnerable time for them is when they go to leave. And of course, my godmother at 63 years of age went to leave her 68-year-old husband after 45 years of marriage, and he murdered her. So this is just a classic textbook case of how the most vulnerable moments in a woman's life to be murdered is when they put their foot down and go, enough scaring me, I'm going to leave, and try and pick up their children as if they should ever have to. So going back, number 5 thing you can do, make men leave first, ankle bracelet them, So covering off lots of issues here, sorry to jump around, we're taking the, you get accused of being, you're going off on tangents. No, I'm not. I'm actually making a dissertation which explores all of the relevant issues that feed into these central issues which are under discussion here, okay? Don't put me down and say, she's tangential. She goes on tangents. No, I don't. I'm making an argument and I'm covering off all the points with preambles that dovetail and feed into the confluence of my argument. Go to the mouth of the river here. Yes, and of course there's the gag. Yes, she does have a river for a mouth. It is my understanding that you have raised these same concerns with the relevant Commonwealth ministers. Yes, I have. Katie Gallagher, Minister for Women as well. Brian Mitchell down in Tasmania, where I own a property, and when I was forced to live down there away from my children because I couldn't afford a house next to them. Because that's it. Australia, you're standing in it. You're living in a country where women can't even afford, having raised children, to live next to their own children due to housing unaffordability. Just, have to go and live in 3,000 kilometres away, 2,000 kilometres away. Not see your children because you can't afford a house. I mean, this is bullshit, and this is fact. This is bullshit fact for women who leave men who are going to kill them. That's what was said to me. Danielle, I could kill you and get away with it because everybody would believe it was in self-defence. And that man has my children and has kept my 11-year-old daughter from me since she was 8. And it's all legal. So, second paragraph of Alison Burns, member for Cunningham's letter, reads, "It is not appropriate for a member of Parliament to intervene in individual family law matters, and therefore I am unable to meet with you to discuss your case and your broader concerns regarding the workings of the Family Law Act." Do you hear what she did there? She lied. She could easily have met with me to discuss the broader concerns regarding the workings of the Family Law Act. I didn't ask her to intervene in my case because it's illegal. And I'm not stupid, although arguably I am, but I'm not stupid on the basic matters of the knowledge of the separation of powers. The courts separate from the political, from policymakers, the Parliament, which is separate from religion. That's meant to be the fundamentals of the Westminster system, right? Separation of powers. So she then verbals me, basically, pretending that I was asking her to intervene in my case. I asked no such thing. And in fact, I'm going down to try and meet with Rochelle White, the policy advisor for Katie Gallagher, or one of them, who very kindly gave me half an hour of her time and then wrote me a 2-page letter which said, "We hope that this gives you some consolation that we've recently overturned the presumption of shared care, although we have not criminalised parental alienation." It gives me no consolation whatsoever. I will never, ever, ever, ever get back the years of my children's lives, and they are now young adults and they're not children who are all cuddly but they've been completely alienated. So no, it's no consolation at all, because Labor and Liberal both, Liberal National Party Coalition and Labor, have never gone and done what they need to do, which is criminalise the theft of children. I mean, how, again, just to cover this off in case you haven't watched these other videos, how can you possibly understand when you turn on the 6 o'clock news that Israel's now going to murder children all over the Gaza Strip because their children have been stolen from them? Because Israelis, the chosen people's children and family members, have been stolen hostage from them. So they're going to unleash hell on earth and murder innocent people who are already under police guard with settlements encroaching and eating their land for the last 70 years, as if none of this has any precedent and cause for Hamas in the first place, as if Israeli actions aren't seriously questionable, is the mild way to put it, in the first place. And you can understand that, oh yeah, so they stole their family members, so they're just going to basically rain hell down and murder the Gaza Strip now. 2.5 million outdoor prisoners, as it's been referred to by people internationally. Or Russia comes into Ukraine and steals their children just to really put the fear of God in them as a first act of war, like rape is. Not that we were taught that at school either, along with Aboriginal history, Australian history, I mean, of what we did to Aboriginals. Just all these things that men do. And so, of course, we can understand that. But you're in a country where it's being done to 10 of my friends. And these people are some of the most respected people in Australia. And some of them are people I went to school with who are working in aged care. So they've got police checks and working with children checks. And they're some of the nicest people you ever met. And they're wiping people's bums and helping people for a living. And they haven't seen their now 16-year-old children for 5 years. And as one person, that's a person I went to school with, one of the nicest people I've ever met on earth, and boy, was he funny. Not anymore. Depressed doesn't quite cover it, what this does to you. And it's perfectly fine for this to go on in Australia, is it? How and why? Why are you, if you are watching this, tolerating this? Why haven't you just, instead of scrolling through your Instagram feed, as Briggs said recently, why haven't you gone and written 3 lines to your MP? I find it insane that we can get a criminal record or go to jail or get a fine, get a record and be criminalised for driving our cars after not paying a parking fine for 4 months. But yet, if we steal a child from their other parent, nothing happens to us. I find that insane. Signed, you. Why don't you just write that? Because that's what you're living in. That's what you're tolerating. And the famous quote is that all it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing. Okay? Good men and women to do nothing. So I ain't doing nothing. She therefore verbals me. She lies. She lies that I've asked her to interfere with my family law court case, which is highly offensive. She lies that I've been down there 4 times in a month. It was 4 times in 3 months. And I spoke to an excellent policy advisor of hers called Ian Turton, who himself has just retired from being a family lawyer. He put me onto a woman called Elizabeth. She was all booked out, couldn't take my case. Everyone's all booked out because the bum rush is on to Christmas. Everyone wants to see their children over the school holidays and they're being kept from them. And so, there's a total flood rush on as they're realising that the other parent isn't going to even respond to an email and has cut off and blocked all phone communication with the other parent and cut off and blocked WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram and won't return calls and won't return emails and then just doesn't allow them any time to pick up their children, or in the case of me, when they come to see them 2 years ago, 23rd of March 2022, puts an AVO on them after first taking them to a house without telling me where they lived. All legal, with no consequence. Hence my statement before about, it's ironic that women are murdering men are murdering women in droves. Women aren't murdering men in droves. Like, they get paid less, they get treated like shit, they don't have free childcare, they leave violent men and then they go downhill financially and in every other way. Just revolting. So she then goes on to say, it is not appropriate for a member of parliament to intervene in individual family law matters. I didn't ask her for that, so she verbals me, lies about what I said. And therefore, I am unable to meet with you to discuss your case. Well, no, you could have, because my case is exemplary of what so many other people's cases is. I'm not asking for interference. I'm asking to discuss my case because it's the case of at least 10 other people I know. So she lies again, verbals me again, and lies and says, and your broader concerns regarding the workings of the Family Law Act. So she won't meet with me to discuss the broader workings of the Family Law Act and the things that have happened in my case, which are exemplary of so many other people's cases, parental alienation, and the non-enforcement of extant family law court orders. Because she lies that all of those things are the same thing. My personal case, an intervention. I never asked for an intervention because that's illegal, separation of powers. So she lies that I asked for that and then lies again and says that she can't meet with me to discuss anything else pertaining to the Family Law Court Act based on the fact that I've asked her to intervene in my own case. I didn't. I asked her for an interview about this issue because it pertains to so many more people than me. This is not just me pushing my own barrow, okay? It pertains to so many more people than me. So she lies. She verbals me, as in the nomenclature of what cops, particularly under Roger Rogerson, and previously used to do, and has been done to me. They lie about what you said. I didn't ask her to intervene in my case. And so she completely lies that she can't meet with me to discuss my case. It is her duty to meet with me to discuss the facts of what is happening to so many men and women, given the non-criminalisation of parental alienation in Australia. That is her duty. She's paid to represent her constituents. I am her constituent. So she's paid to meet with people, particularly over matters of such grave importance. And so she's lied and then lied again about why she's blowing me off. The Commonwealth Government is currently undertaking consultations in relation to a draft bill for amendment of the Family Law Act. And this is why I'm going to Canberra this week. That's shut, and I put in a submission saying, yeah, unless you criminalise this, you've missed the entire game. The closing date for consultations in relation to the proposed reforms is the 10th of November 2023. So I got mine in on the 10th of November 2023. If you wish to make a contribution to this process, and then she gives me a link, I recommend that you approach the Legal Aid Commission of New South Wales for advice and assistance. Free legal advice can also be obtained from Justice Connect on this phone number. Yours sincerely, Alison Burns. These people would easily be, they live literally, I told you I got to give her the elevator pitch because she literally got into the same elevator as me. And her husband, Paul Scully, is the Minister for State Labor, and his office is very cutely right over the road from hers. And they're married. And I went down to him and said, you've got a serious problem with the Wollongong police locking people up, saying that they deserve to lose their children, as Senior Constable Lloyd did to me in front of 2 female witnesses in the lobby of a hotel, Carmel Orion and Catherine McNaught. So he should be fired. Yasmin Catley, I'm telling you, coming for your force because you've got a serious problem. It's thieving my grandparents' antique jewellery out of my bag after arresting me on a false arrest for trying to give my child food and clothes, having no one enforce her family law court and my family law court, her family law court rights that I've got in my hand to know me on any meaningful basis for 11 months straight. And then I go to give her a home-cooked meal and food, clothes that I've bought her, get locked up by 5 cops with 3 squad cars and a shit-smeared paddy wagon. You would think I had tried to bomb the police station. You would think. Nah. Then when they give me my bag back after throwing me in a shit-smeared jail cell next to a toilet where I contracted COVID despite being triple immunised, calling me a cunt and a bitch, which is why Yasmin Catley and Jodie Harrison, you need to listen to this as well, and Kate Washington particularly. And then steal my jewellery. And then they just refer me to the local LECC, the local Area Command Police Interrogation Force, who are the police investigating themselves. And then right back, oh no, I've got no case to answer. And then, oh yeah, but we're still going to charge you for resist arrest. And like fuck you are. And I wrote off and 5 a.m. in the morning, it's on my Facebook post on public, look further down, get a 5 a.m. email, oh, we're dropping those charges. Yeah, well, you better, because you were wrong in the first place. You arrested my flatmate, so his charges have been dropped as well. So look, if you think I'm not actually doing what I'm saying that I'm going to do, you're wrong. And I'm on the right side of history, and you will be too if you support this, just by writing a letter to your local MP. Why should we not address, let's not bullshit ourselves. If you're talking about addressing mental health concerns, which are actually emotional health concerns and financial health concerns and social health concerns, again, as the great quote further down the Facebook page here says, words to the effect, I should have committed this to memory, I'm sorry I haven't, words to the effect of anyone who professes to care for, professes to have compassion for a man and his situation, or in this case a woman and her situation, without regards to the societal structures that caused that suffering, is practicing sentimentality, not love, or words to that effect, and it was by William Sloane. And I'm really going to commit that one to memory because that is perfect, because this is what is happening to women. You cannot say, oh, gee, we're so sorry they're being murdered, as we've just seen on Insiders this morning, Sunday the 3rd of December 2023. Oh, it's a national crisis, yeah. We women are sick of this, as Sarah Hanson-Young said. I like Sarah Hanson-Young, by the way. It's no reflection on her. But as everyone keeps saying, oh, we're so sick of this. Oh, hand-wringing, what can we do? I've just given you 5 things you can do right now, so stop bullshitting yourself. I said it 7 years ago to Kay Harrison, the documentary filmmaker. I've said it to anyone who'll listen, so you start saying it, because there are solutions, and I've listed them all here. Okay, so I'm getting that this is a little bit long at this stage, and because these are being migrated over to YouTube for posterity, because if they are not going to enforce my children's human rights and my human rights and family law court parenting rights, and I know 10 people, 7 men and 3 women, who haven't seen their children in years and are suicidal over it, and then you want to bullshit that you're actually interested in addressing mental and emotional health, again, to finish my point, which is constituted by the forces that as William Sloane's statement refers, constituted by societal structure. Remember Andrew Denton signed off on enough rope? And remember, it is society that's to blame. Good night. This is what he meant. So he went and changed it. He made enough money, handed over his film production firm, said, great, you guys, you keep going, excellent. I'm going to trek off around the world now because I watched my father, Kip Denton, die, who apparently wrote the film Gallipoli, if I've got my facts straight, die a slow and painful death from cancer that he need not have, which is completely inhumane when you put a dog out of its misery. And so he went and travelled around the world, found out how they do voluntary assisted euthanasia and dying laws all around the world, and brought it back to Australia, campaigned religiously through Go Gently, the organisation he founded. And now we have, in every state, with the exception of the territories, Northern and ACT, voluntary assisted dying laws, but only if you are 6 to 12 months terminal diagnosis. Not like Belgium, where you simply want to die because you're 78, you've got no family, the only family you've spoken to are long dead, you're in a facility with no friends, you've got no meaning to your life, or you're stuck in a wheelchair and you've had a stroke and you've got high needs and you are in torture, but your brain's still working, but your body's not, and you want to die, but that's not a terminal diagnosis. So let's go further. Go gently. Let's go further. Let's push this out to people who literally are suffering any lengthy thing that they know has been certified by psychiatrists to say that they know that they're not insane, they're suffering, and they want out, and they want it in a dignified and gentle way. Go gently. Let's extend this now. Piss off, Christian idiot, LNP, conservative, pale, stale males. Piss off, pale, stale females. Piss off. Do not interfere in other people's rights to life and rights to death. Don't. It's not your business. How dare you? Who do you think you are? Go away. So, yeah, so until local members don't verbal people about pretending that they're trying to interfere in their particular court case, like I clearly was not, I was talking about the structures that dovetail into these issues. Unless you criminalise parental alienation, you are going to be feeding into the mental health concerns and suicide rates, particularly of men, because men have historically suffered parental alienation at far higher rates than women in Australia because of child support payments and because it's been presumed that particularly the younger children were to remain with the mother. Well, the complete reverse has happened in my case. I ran a federal daycare service to get away from him, threatening to kill me and slamming a door in my face and bruising my nose and laughing at me, cutting the power to my house, dragging me around the kitchen floor by my hair in front of my children after I questioned why he'd poured oil all over my porous baby's expensive bib in the sink. A narcissist can't be told anything, remember? You know, one clear definition of a narcissist. You cannot criticise them at any cost. They will assault you or they will literally abuse you outright. one or both. And he did. And it was the same with Linda Green and it was the same with Michelle Daly in between. So look, I think I was going to do some readings from the family law rulings in my case and from DCJ, New South Wales, but I think I'll do them a little bit later on in the day just to give everyone a toilet break and to allow this large piece of data to be migrated over to its own individual episode at DD, that's DEE TV Australia, where these things are going to stay in posterity. Because if the Australian government, state and federal, are going to violate my and my children's human rights to this level, then I'm going to start to show and read transcripts and letters of exactly how they're doing it. Again, Northern Territory, New South Wales, number 1 and number 2 on earth per capita for taking children off mothers. And those mothers have always, usually always, overwhelmingly, not always, but overwhelmingly, strike from the record, not always, overwhelmingly often been abused by men first, and overwhelmingly have no housing affordability. And definitely, even like working women whose entire wages are going to pay childcare bills, have no childcare affordability because childcare is not universally free. So unless or until childcare is universally free, women will have no equality with men, even in an advanced democracy. So I think I'm going to leave it there at 11:15, having gone on at 10. That's a long one. Go please to my GoFundMe page, and if you know anyone who lives in Canberra with a couch or a spare bedroom, it's the last sitting week this week. I'm coming down to door knock, and I'll finish one thing, I forgot. I resorted to phoning Michaelia Cash's office. I find her one of the most offensive members of the LNP, alongside the Bridget McKenzie, who was allowed to get away with, and Scott Morrison, obviously, who made her do it, sent her the coloured-coded spreadsheet saying, give money to these sports clubs because they're in our electorate. Don't give money to those sports clubs because they're in a Labor voting electorate. Those people should be in jail. That's called a racket. And by the way, that's one of the charges Donald Trump is facing in America, is because he conspired with other members of his staff to make a racket where he said, we've got to question the electoral results and everyone get on board, and you're not on my, you'll be fired if you're not, and this is your job, you're on my team, so you will roll out this, you will do this, and that's called a racket, and he's facing criminal charges in America. So why are we not prosecuting Bridget McKenzie and Scott Morrison? Why? And for robo-debt as well, and for falsely swearing himself into 5 portfolios. Scott Morrison should be in jail. Is he above the law? Is Bridget McKenzie above the law? Getting back to Michaelia Cash, again, John Pascoe, Order of Australia, ex-Chief Justice of the Family Law Court, Order of Australia, suggested on the 4th phone call that I made to him in the last 1.5 years that I contact Michaelia Cash. And I said, good God, I said I wouldn't pick on her if she was on fire. Nicely, I said that. And he was a bit taken aback, so I can only presume he's an LNP voter. And I was like, well, God, why would I do that? And she said, he said, she's the alternative federal attorney general for the family court. I was like, okay. Insert, Barry Humphrey's mouth. I said, okay, gonna have to phone her. So I did. And unbelievably, it was their office that gave me more time, because I said, look, you're going to basically head right now for a dumb vote who wants an ex-cop who's just says, no. If you don't know, vote no. You don't have a leader who just goes no, and who's a thug ex-cop with no compassion for the most vulnerable people in the community, leading your party when you had great people like Julie Bishop and others who you rolled. You can't have that. The Australian public aren't that stupid. They're not going to buy it for that much longer. You need policies. So here are a few. And I rolled off everything I've just told you, from the absolute outlawing of commercial and confidence clauses immediately across all tiers of government, through to the legislation, everything I've explained in this video about concerning women and how to stop them being murdered, and legislative reform to have admissible evidence of them secretly recording those threats, etc. And they listened keenly and sharply for 40 minutes. So if you've done that, know that I'm at the stage now where I am no longer party partisan, particularly after this letter from Alison Burns. Tanya Plibersek was brilliant, like I said. Brian Mitchell in Tasmania was brilliant. But down in this cushy little setup here, these people lied. My federal MP lied that I was trying to get an intervention in my family law court case, and then conflated that issue as a reason she couldn't talk to me about the other issues, which are structural reform of the Family Law Act and the criminalisation of parental alienation. Okay? So the GoFundMe page, oh, how could I forget? And here is the absolute final, how could I forget? Here's my, for anyone still watching, here's the great proof. How could I forget? Where's that gone? Oh, well, I won't show it, but I will tell you. For anyone considering the GoFundMe page, I got my case listed. After last week's, broadcasts, weeping, saying that I'd been asked to go on the contravention list because simply saying, and this is another reform that needs to be done to the Family Law Court Act, because simply saying that when you go to list a contravention and how your family law court orders, parenting orders have been contravened by the other parent, I said, well, there's no point listing them all because it's from the 11th of October 2020 until now and there's too many to list. And then they went, no, that's not how it works. Go away and list every single time. And, you know, Easter's a different time every year, and AB swap around holidays are a different time, and Mother's and Father's Day is a different date. So I had to work for 3 days of my life through a calendar and list every date. And then when we sat on an audio-visual link-up where we were muted unless we were on, and we listened to other people's cases, our case was last because we'd only been listed the night before. I had to pay $150 to a process server to serve him the papers. They wouldn't accept them by email, even though he'd put an AVO on me when I tried to see my children. There's another idea. Everybody, Federal Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, there's another one. Immediate acceptance of service via email for contraventions, particularly if parents put an AVO on you and you're a struggling parent who can't afford a process worker. So $150 down the drain over to serve him so that the next morning we could get listed. And we were listed last. And 3 hours I listened to various parents say exactly what I've told you in this video and beg and plead with the registrar who was the gatekeeper of whether we would get on before a judge or not. And then, to the utter astonishment of me, and the pathetic irony, another one of the stupid, hello Productivity Commission, here's another one for you. The stupid irony was that she then said to many other adults before me, well, sorry, you've listed 20 pages here. Mine was 12. You've listed 20 pages here of contraventions in of your parenting orders in the last 3 years. Again, I saw a woman with black under her eyes who hadn't seen her children in years. She was sitting there, like me, death warmed up. And said, yeah, you've listed too many. We can't deal with all those. Can you give us your best 10? Quote, unquote. Can you give us your best 10? So I wasn't allowed on to listing a contravention, going bang, bang, he's contravening the orders. I haven't seen it for 3 years. It's urgent. Give it back to me. No, go onto the contravention list. You write them all down. Well, it's been 3 years. There's too many to write down. No, you need to write them all down. So I wrote them all down, then wait for 3 hours and listen to all these other cases of all these other parents come up before us that we were privy to on this audio-visual link up to the Family Law Court Registrar in Sydney. I believe her name was Fredrickson. I could have that wrong. Jamison, Fredrickson, there's a few. It doesn't matter. She's part of the function, the non-functionality of the Family Law Court. Only to hear her say, and I quote, oh, you've listed too many pages of contraventions. We can't deal with all those contraventions because each one is supposed to potentially be a criminal charge. Right? Each one. So give us your best 10. Oh, no, what was your best 10 out of the last 3 years? Christmas Day, my birthday, Easter, their birthdays, they all add up to 10 because you've times 3 people, me and my 2 children, by all of the special occasions in each year, times 3 years, there's your best 10. But it's actually all the other weekends and all the other times as well. So the idiocy of the Family Law Court, on top of all of it, is that they make people list every single contravention date that the orders have been contravened, and then they tell them that they've listed too many. What the is that? What is that? Really? And Alison Burns for Cunningham wouldn't discuss this with me. Like as if that was about me. This is about the law, the non-performance of the law, and the structural issues that dovetail into the law, and the non-criminalisation of the abuse of human rights, where a child is kept by a parent from another parent, usually out of A, vengeance, and B, to avoid paying child support or to generate child support. as in my case, where I've showed you in other videos that out of my disability support pension is automatically gleaned to pay the father, who is on $110,000 a year working for the Public Service Association in New South Wales, that his brother Stuart Little runs on $400,000 a year. And I am paying out of my disability support pension to him when he is breaking federal family law court orders and taking 100% claim on my child's time after abusing 3 women on the New South Wales police record, including me, with an AVO that the police took in February 2013 to protect me from him after he put a brick through my back window when I was running a childcare service to get away from him, after he'd also told me he could kill me and get away with it because everybody would believe it was in self-defence. And DCJ is harbouring my son with this man. So this, Kate Washington and Yasmin Catley and Jodie Harrison, is why I knocked on your door at 52 Martin Place 3 weeks ago. Joanna Gow, your policy advisor, blew me off at Jodie Harrison. I'm naming names, okay? And then was sent away by Kate Washington as an unreasonable complainant. Yeah? Do you think I'm an unreasonable complainant? Vote 1, Australia stop abusing human rights. Stop locking up refugees indefinitely. Woo-woo, go High Court. Yeah, wrong ruling, right idea. Wrong ruling for the people who'd abused everyone and are criminals. Right idea for vulnerable refugees. Number 2, stop allowing parents to steal children off other parents. And number 3, all the ideas listed below that are practical, logistical things you can do right now if only you cared and valued women's lives to stop them being murdered. All below. Signing off. Please, again, go over to my GoFundMe page. I am achieving things. The case has been listed. Unfortunately, to finalise it, the first date that they gave me to choose, as soon as I'd lodged all the paperwork on the initiating application, because it's now been so long that they wouldn't even list it in the contravention list, which is why I was crying in the previous video, finally got listed this week. First available date, 31st of January, 2024. There goes another 2 months over Christmas and my birthday, my 53rd birthday, of my and my children's lives. So I wrote in for an urgency application. Nearly had a stroke last year when I found out he was relocating them to the second house in 3 years without disclosing their address. So a mother is asked to go to sleep, and a father, 10 of them that I know, in a cohort of loving, educated people, are being asked to go to sleep at night without knowing where their children's heads lay on earth. And this is legal, because this is Australia, and you are standing and lying in it. See you next time. I might do it later on today and read some of these transcripts from DCJ. That's going to be my next one. Bye-bye. Oops. Oh dear.